Hi, folks. My name is Jack Dann. I'm talking to you from sunny Australia, where it's winter, and I'm going to read a story and some ancillary material from my new collection called Islands of Time. Uh, I should mention that we had a glitch, which is nobody's fault, that the copyright on this book was 2023 when it actually came out in March 2024. So we're trying to work out what we do about that. So I'm going to read you a very short preface to the book and the first story, and here I go now. It's called Row of Books. I remember Annie McCaffrey's tiny office on the ground floor of her grand old Victorian house in Seacliff, New York. Incidentally, if you don't know who Anne McCaffrey was, she wrote the Dragon Riders of Pern series and passed away a few years ago. I was standing in the doorway, taking in the books on the narrowly spaced shelves that covered the walls. Annie was sitting behind her desk and staring hard at a row of books beside her. It was 1969. I was 24 years old. Annie was 43. "These books are mine, Tawny Lion," she said, and then paused. "It's as if every year is on this bookshelf. One day you'll be counting the years of your life by the number of books you've written. And that's what you end up with. A row of books, the years of your life. A row of books, the years of your life." So now it's 2023, and I'm sitting in my own office in country Australia, which I suppose is as far away from Seacliff and my hometown in upstate New York as one can get. Although Annie has been gone for a while, her books and words stay with me. And now I, too, have those shelves of books, which are indeed also constructions of dreams and nightmares and memories. When I was choosing the stories for this collection, as I pulled down volume after volume, looking wistfully at the covers of the magazines and anthologies in which they appeared, rereading the words I had written in different places and different times, I could see the years. I could see once again those strangers called me who wrote those stories. I could remember the thought processes, the dreams, the catalyzing ideas that birthed those improbable stories. And so I became, for a while, a time traveler. And once again, I swam in those warm, often dangerous seas of memory. I was once again privy to the hows and whys of my creative life, that sea in which, to continue to stretch the metaphor unmercifully, I'm still submerged. Although I'm talking directly to you now, oh perspicacious reader, I am still engulfed, still living multiple lives, still dreaming worlds and words onto paper and screen. It's been a privilege. And it's a privilege not only to share the stories contained in this volume, but to share my recollections of how these fictions came to be. Needless to say, these recollections, these afterwards that follow the stories, sorry, are optional add-ons. If I've done my job and dreamed the stories correctly, they will stand on their own metaphoric feet and give the bird to that constructed identity often referred to as the author. So, welcome, dreamers. This was written in February 23. So the story I'm going to read is called Mr. Death Goes to the Beach. Raphael Lewis Goldsworthy couldn't stop coughing. The familiar tickle was deep down in his throat. Tickle, tickle, cough, cough. And his back hurt with every barking convulsion. "Where's your inhaler?" his mother asked, casually patting the orange-striped beach blanket as if the device had somehow migrated into the sand below. Without acknowledging her, Raphael pulled a Ventolin inhaler out of his pocket of his swimming trunks and inhaled a puff of the acrid chemical mist. "Take another puff," his mother said. He pressed down on the inhaler again, held his breath, exhaled, and squinted at the ocean. The waves weren't very high, but the ocean seemed to extend right up to the sky. Raphael felt his lungs open up into chilly rooms inside him. He breathed deeply in and out, shutting his mother in, shutting his mother out, and wondered whether the ocean was actually blue or green. The sky was certainly blue, except, of course, for the clouds that seemed to sail across it like fluffy boats. But the water, well, that was something else again. It looked dark blue one minute, then green, and then it looked like part of the sky. That didn't make sense to Raphael, and he shook his head, something he did when he was perplexed. He could ask his mother, of course, but she wouldn't know the answer and would just tell him to take another puff on his inhaler, which he didn't need to do, or put on more sunscreen. And then, her motherly obligation completed, she'd forget about him entirely. "Raphael, take another puff on your puffer." Raphael continued to stare at the ocean. And then, to distance himself from his mother, he turned his head just a bit to the right and stared with all his might at the orange and purple granite boulders that looked like huge rounded huts sticking up from the sand. He saw a boy who looked to be around 10, Raphael's age, although Raphael was almost 11, standing in a cleft between two rocks. It didn't look like there was much space. The kid must have squeezed himself hard between those boulders, and a few feet away, Raphael saw a rather clownish-looking man standing on top of one of the rocks, a blood-red rock. The man was dressed in a white suit. His shirt was open at the collar, and he wore a wide-brim Akubra hat at a jaunty angle. But his pale, rosy-cheeked face was odd, too narrow somehow, as if someone had pulled his hair so hard that it had stretched his head. Raphael shook his own head again, swallowed the tickle that would cause a cough, and wondered, how the hell did that guy climb up that rock? He would have needed a ladder or something. "Raphael, will you stop daydreaming and put this sunblock on?" his mother said, holding out a greasy tube of ointment. "See the guy standing on the rock?" Raphael asked. "How'd he get up there?" "I'm sure I don't know. He probably found a way to climb up from the other side. Now take this damn cream and put it on your nose and your ears. They're already starting to get burned. You want to look like a clown?" He turned to his mother and looked at her as if for the first time. She was deeply tan, and her jet black hair was pulled away from her face and held in place with a Cartier comb his father had given her. Her eyes looked very, very blue, set in that tan, and Raphael could see why all his friends at the academy always turned up when she visited on weekends. She had once been a famous model and still looked like a movie star, and she always wore low-cut dresses to show off her breasts. Right now, she was wearing a white bikini, white as the pristine sand all around them. Raphael knew what pristine meant. His mother certainly wasn't that. When she left his father to, quote, take a permanent vacation to Australia, end quote, all sorts of people called her names on social media. And Raphael had to bash Sammy Walton right in the nose for calling her a slut. He squeezed a handful of sand until he could feel it crunch. His hand felt hot, and he imagined that the grains of sand were so sharp that they were cutting holes in his palm. And if he bled to death, then he and his mother could go back home, and he could see his father again. Well, he'd probably be a ghost or something, but at least he'd be back with his father in America. His father was a U.S. senator and a Republican. "Why do they call this place Squeaky Beach?" he asked his mother. "How the hell should I know?" she said. "You need more cream on your nose. You've got skin like your father's, pale as a sheet." "I can't help that." "That's why you need sunblock." "I know why they call it Squeaky Beach," Raphael said. "Then why ask me? I wanted to know if you knew." His mother removed her comb, and her thick, luxuriant hair fell across her shoulders. She slipped the comb halfway into her bikini top, and the diamonds sparkled like wet sand in the sun. Raphael noticed that a man with gray hair and black swimming trunks had just walked past them again. He was quite a walker, that guy. "I would suppose it's called Squeaky Beach because the sand squeaks," his mother said. "And do you know why it squeaks?" "Stop the platonic dialogue bullshit. You sound like your father. It's very annoying. He can get away with it. You can't. He's a senator, and you're not." She looked away from Raphael and smiled at the gray-haired man, who was already on his way back toward them again. "Well," Raphael said, "the sand squeaks because it's made out of quartz, and all the grains are rounded, like worn down, and they're pristine. The sand by our house in Fort Lauderdale doesn't squeak because it's polluted, and so the grains can't rub against each other as well." And his mother wasn't listening. Raphael shook his head. He couldn't even get her to pay enough attention to piss her off. She said hello to the gray-haired man, who made some awkward small talk with her and nodded to Raphael almost every time he ended a sentence. His name was Ronald, and he owned a company in Thailand that built yachts. And it didn't take him long to ask her if she would like to take a swim. And he made a little bow as if he were asking her for a dance. And she smiled the smile that made her dimples squinch. Raphael considered it all disgusting. After the requisite amount of coaching, she stood up and said, "That would be very nice. It's a very hot sun today, isn't it?" And before Ronald could extend the obligatory invitation to her son, she said, "Would you be a dear, Raphael, and guard our belongings? We're just going to take a very quick swim to cool off. And when we come back, you can take a dip. And later we can drive to Moo's restaurant for a steak dinner. How's that?" Raphael grunted and looked sullen. What was there to guard anyway? A cheap paperback book about the president? A clutch bag of lotions and other stuff? And okay, there was her wallet. It made sense to guard her wallet from wallet thieves in this dangerous place full of health nuts and eco-tourists. He watched his mother and Raphael step carefully through the squeaky sand to the breakers. And then he looked back toward the red-streaked boulders that cut into the sea and rose into the sky. He was keeping an eye on the man who had mysteriously climbed to the top of that rounded rock, and he noticed that the boy who had squeezed between the rocks had disappeared. But he was there just a minute ago, and the clownish man was no longer standing on top of the rounded granite mound. Now he was standing right there in the cleft where the boy had been. How the hell could he fit in there? Raphael went to investigate. He could keep an eye on the blanket, and there wasn't anybody sitting in that area anyway. He purposely crunched the sand with his heel every time he took a step. There was something delicious and satisfying about its scrunch under his feet. He walked to the cleft where the boy and then the man had just been standing. But neither one of them was there anymore. It was as if they had both simply disappeared. Hello. Startled, Raphael turned around, and there was the man. His hat cast a shadow over his face so that even though Raphael was looking right at him, and they weren't even 2 feet apart, he couldn't quite make out his features. It was as if he could discern the man's features better from a distance than up close. He might as well have been looking at a grainy close-up photograph of the man's face. "Hello," Raphael said, reflexively backing away. Although his mother had carried on about not speaking to strangers, he didn't feel nervous. In fact, he felt quite relaxed, contented, sort of. This was man-to-man stuff. One man saying hello to another man, and the other man saying hello back, like that. Raphael glanced toward his mother's empty beach blanket and said, "I've got to keep an eye on my mother's blanket. Her wallet and stuff is in it." The man nodded and said, "Yes, you never know, although it's pretty safe around here. Not like Fort Lauderdale." "How do you know I'm from Fort Lauderdale?" The man smiled, a thin smile that didn't show any teeth. "Well, if you were Sherlock Holmes, and if you were cognizant of every detail, how would you discover the truth?" "Well," and Raphael smiled and nodded, "Okay, yeah, okay. It's my swimming trunks, right? There was an emblem on the pocket at Fort Lauderdale, Florida." The man smiled. But Raphael's t-shirt covered his trunks. It was too large for him and only good for the beach. Of course, the wind probably caught it and revealed the emblem. "I suppose you also know my name?" Raphael asked. "Do you know my name?" "Well, Sherlock Holmes would have very good hearing and would have heard your mother talking to you." He smiled thinly again. "No, that's a trick," Raphael said playfully. "Come on, Mr. Holmes, tell me my name." "Nope, I can't make it out, Raphael." Raphael giggled. "That's pretty good. Now tell me your name. Don't you want to guess?" "Give me a clue." "Okay," said the man, tilting his head back, but that didn't help. Raphael still couldn't make out his features. "Do you remember the boy who was standing in the rock cleft behind me and watching you?" "I don't know if he was watching me," Raphael said. "If he was watching anybody, it was probably my mother. Everybody watches her." He thought he could see the man smile again. "Well, do you know what happened to him?" "What's that got to do with your name?" Raphael asked. "Is he your son or something?" The man shook his head and laughed softly, a deep yet soft laugh. "No, Raphael, he's certainly not my son." Raphael looked around, but couldn't see the boy. "He's drowning," the man said, matter-of-factly, as he pointed toward a dark spot in the ocean far beyond the rocks. "I'll pick him up later." Raphael felt the tickle of a cough, which exploded. He took a puff of Ventolin. The sand carried by gusts of wind must be irritating his lungs, and said, "I can't see anything, and if he's drowning, we should find a lifeguard or something." The man smiled. "I'm afraid it's too late for that, but don't worry. Everything is in hand. I've slowed things down over there so we can chat for a bit longer." Raphael shook his head and started to say, Now that I've given you all the clues you need, I think you should be able to discover my name. I think I just better get back to my mother's blanket. It was a very nice meeting you, Mr. Yes, but Mr. Who? Or Mr. What?" Raphael wasn't having any more of this. This was weird. And although he had to admit it, his mother was probably right about talking to strangers. But weird as it was, Raphael liked talking to this guy. It was sort of like the feeling you get when your feet are scrunching in the squeaky sand. But Raphael started walking away anyway. "Come on, Raphael, take a guess," the man said. And even though the man was behind Raphael, it was as if his voice was right in front of him. Raphael stopped and felt a tingle of excitement, the thrill of prior knowledge, and he remembered something in the Bible about an apple. He turned around and said, "Okay, So maybe you think you're some sort of a ghost, like an angel. Yes? Like death or something. But you'd have to be nuts. And I don't believe in that's very good, Raphael. I can tell you're a smart boy, a veritable sleuth. Raphael didn't know what a sleuth was, but he glowed with the compliment. That was more than he ever got from his mother. Okay, the man said, taking Raphael's hand and leading him toward the shoreline. Raphael didn't resist because it felt like holding hands. And walking with this man was the most natural thing in the world to do. But Raphael couldn't help but notice that the man's hand was cool. It felt just like when you first stepped into the ocean on a beautiful, warm day. As he took a deep breath of the warm, fragrant air, the tickle in his throat disappeared, and his back didn't hurt as it usually did when he had been coughing. You're pretty close to figuring out my name, the man continued. So, since we're friends now, why don't you just call me Mr. Death? I tell you my given name, but I think you're a respective boy, and Mr. is a reflection of respect. Don't you agree? Yes, I suppose, Raphael said, suddenly wondering what it would feel like to drown. Mr. Death always enjoyed the beach. It was one of the few little recreations he allowed himself, for his schedule was always full. His life's work, if one could put it in such whimsical terms, was the death of human bipeds. And today was like every other day, except the numbers always differed slightly. So far, he had taken 126,000 and change. Well, actually 126,365, and his day wasn't over yet. That doesn't mean, of course, that he was consciously or even physically present at every death. Suffice it to say that it was all a matter of iteration, and that Mr. Death was nothing more than an algorithm. But he was certainly present right here and now, presently enjoying the sea-scented air, the long afternoon warmth of the sun, the fullness of breath in his disincarnate lungs, the salty perfumes of sweat, the small acrid invasions of perfume and suntan lotion, and the bracing presence of this transplanted boy from Fort Lauderdale. Mr. Death led Raphael right past his mother and gray-haired Ronald, who were both sitting on the beach blanket. Raphael's mother didn't even call out to him as he passed, and she was looking straight at Raphael, who stopped right in front of her and was about to say something when Mr. Death gave him a gentle tug. Come along, Raphael. Your mother can't see you right now, and neither can her boyfriend. He's not her boyfriend, Raphael said. She's only known him for 5 minutes. Actually, it's more like a half hour, but he'll be her boyfriend eventually. And what about my father? Mr. Death shrugged and said, oh, I suppose I should pay him a visit. You mean kill him? Mr. Death stopped, as did Raphael, who was still holding his hand. Mr. Death gazed contentedly out to sea and closed his eyes for a few seconds, enjoying the life-giving warmth of the sun. He thought about Raphael and glanced into his prospective future. The bronchiectasis would soon reveal itself as a symptom of an aggressive form of cystic fibrosis, unless, of course, he did the unthinkable and intervened. I don't kill anyone, Raphael. I just, well, take them. Just as you would take a peanut out of a jar. My father isn't a peanut. You're all peanuts, Mr. Death said, tugging at Raphael's hand to continue their stroll along the beach. Well, actually, numbers. Raphael dragged behind a bit, shaking his head, as if he were trying to figure things out, then asked, why couldn't my mother see me? Am I dead? Mr. Death laughed and picked up a little segmented sandworm out of the sand, which he then flicked into the water. Why, do you feel dead? I don't know what that would feel like. Neither does anybody, I suppose, Mr. Death said as he continued to walk. If I'm not dead or anything, then why didn't my mother see me back there? Raphael felt something warm churning inside him, inside his chest. Is she dead? No, nobody's dead, Mr. Death said sharply. Your mother didn't see you because no one can see you right now. You're not in time. When you're with me, you're free. I don't feel free, Raphael said. But he knew that was a lie as soon as he said it. It felt like he was jumping on a trampoline and was in midair defying gravity for a heart-stopping instant. Except this wasn't for a second. It just went on and on, holding Mr. Death's hand and feeling the sun all over him, as if he wasn't wearing shorts and a shirt, and his lungs felt as light as light. They walked and walked, the ocean forever on their right, trees and stone headlands shifting shape ahead of them, as if everything was almost transparent and apt to change at any time. And then Mr. Death suddenly surprised himself by saying, "We'd best get you back to your mother now." Was this an act of mercy, he asked himself, feeling the boy's soft hand in his, and then he laughed at himself, as only an algorithm could. Well, a single act of mercy out of 126,365 iterations seemed fair enough. As they walked back along Squeaky Beach, Raphael asked, "You said nobody's dead, but that's a lie, right? You told me that the kid who was looking at me, or at my mother, was drowning. What are you going to do, undrown him?" "No, I'm going to take care of him right now," Mr. Death said softly, smiling to himself. And as they approached the spot where Raphael's mother was sitting, he squeezed Raphael's hand and disappeared. "And where the hell have you been?" Raphael's mother said, her face tight with anger. "You're supposed to guard our stuff, not go, well, where the hell did you go?" "Just around," Raphael said, suddenly feeling alone and somehow bereft. He shook his head and sat down on the far corner of the blanket. Everything, even the air, seemed heavy and claustrophobic again. "So what happened to your boyfriend?" he asked his mother. She laughed. "You mean Douglas? I thought he said his name was Ronald." His mother shook her head, and her hair moved across her shoulders like a shiny black wave. "Whatever. He was just some guy looking for the main chance, and he's certainly not my boyfriend. I'm married to your father, remember? Can we go back home and see him?" "Maybe," she said, looking suddenly and uncharacteristically pensive. "Maybe we can sometime. We'll see. But right now, let's get packed up. Are you hungry?" Raphael helped his mother fold the blanket and put everything into a carry bag. He was actually a little hungry. And as they made their way along a path through coastal scrub toward the car park, Raphael heard a woman scream, "My baby! Oh my God! No!" Something like that. Although distant, the shrill voice sounded just like his mother's. "What's going on?" his mother asked, stopping. "Maybe we should go back and see." "No, it's okay," Raphael said, remembering something, remembering feeling free, as if he could walk invisibly right through the ocean and the sky or the red granite boulders. Someone probably just drowned or something. He took a deep breath, inhaled the salt-washed air as if with new lungs. "But there's really nothing we can do to help. Really." His mother looked at him for a second, looked at him as if she could really see him, and then nodded. And as they continued on to the car park, and as the sun burned down on them without mercy, Raphael wondered when they would be able to go back to the beach again. That's the end. I did a very quick note to the story, as I did all the stories in the book. So I'll quickly read you the afterword, and then I'll get out of your way so that you can enjoy the convention. Mr. Death Goes to the Beach appeared in a special Gardner Dozois memorial edition of Asimov's science fiction, a magazine that Gardner edited for 20 years. Gardner was one of my closest and dearest friends, family. In a Q&A that I did for Asimov's at the time, I was asked, what's the story behind this piece? And I wrote, this is one of those short stories that just slipped out of my unconscious. That rarely happens, and I'm sure it has something to do with the death of my dear friend Gardner Dozois. I remember waking up from a night of bad dreams, one of those exhausting, seemingly sleepless nights. And as I propped myself up in the bed, I imagined the idea of death as a personification of the harried bureaucrat. And this combined with the ocean and the beach, which I associate with comfort, freedom, and fear. The idea of drowning, of the pull of deep water, that sort of thing. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about death, my image of him. And as I did so, the so-called texture of the image took on the coloration of a deadly story I admire by J.D. Salinger, A Perfect Day for Banana Fish. It's a mood piece of a story with an ending that shocked the hell out of me. I knew Mr. Death Goes to the Beach wasn't going to have that kind of shock ending, but I wanted to contrast the quiet joys of peace and relaxation with the undeniable finality of death, of sudden death. I wanted to create a story that would be warm and familiar, so warm and familiar that it would chill like an ice cube dropped into the collar of an unsuspecting bather. Whether I accomplish any of this will have to be determined by my readers. So I think, and this is just a bit of pop psychological self-analysis, that Mr. Death Goes to the Beach was this writer's natural way of working out grief and guilt and all those subterranean emotions that accompany the death of a loved one. Well, thank you, friends. I wish I was at the convention instead of sitting here doing our reading. Have a great time. Jack Dann, signing off.